Yo, welcome to my channel. My name's JD and I'm an artist from Bristol in the UK. And in today's video, I'm going to be showing you an in-depth tutorial on how to do a pencil portrait. Now, I've got a little confession. I've only actually ever done one pencil portrait before. And that was included in a video, which I'll put the link up here or wherever it goes. And that was of my favourite MC Stormin. So by all means, this is not a professional level as it's not something I've done lots of, but I'll give it my all and hopefully you can learn a few things. Maybe there's something in this video that you didn't know, but basically everything I've learned from watching YouTube videos. So this is kind of like me giving back in the same way, and yeah, basically these videos were just such a help to me, and hopefully this video can help some of you out there too. So just to let you know, today's subject is one of my best friend's nephews. He actually commissioned this piece after seeing the video of the MC Stormin portrait. I'm going to take you through the whole process, step by step. So I'm going to start off by showing you the equipment that you need. Is that everything? I think that's it. Nothing else to say, but let's crack on. So this is the reference picture I was given. Now I took this as high quality as possible from the person who gave me the picture. Unfortunately, as you can see, it's really quite pixelated. It's actually just a screen grab. But there's a little trick I know for this, and there's this fantastic app, and basically it will just put definition back into the portrait. So this app is called Remini, or Remini, I'm not sure how it's said, but this is the app that I used to basically make the blurry picture into a nice sort of sharper, crisper image to work with. And as you can see here, the comparison is just second to none. This is the original image, and this is the one that's been gone through the app. So yeah, Remini. Okay, I don't know how to say it, but so yeah, that app's a great tool to crispen up your reference photos if you do end up with quite a pixelated image. So the next step to do with this is I'm going to open it up in Photoshop, and the reason for this is because I'm doing a graphite pencil drawing. I basically want to make this into a black and white image so that it's easier to understand the values of the shading and when you're working with a black and white image rather than trying to work with color and change it to graphite. So this is what I'm doing here. I'm just adding the black and white filter, and then I find this quite a light image, so I just touch it down a little bit, make the features sort of a bit more prominent, and just don't want it to look a bit too whitewashed. So that's pretty much it. There you have your black and white image reference to go by. Just save that to my desktop. Call it high def or whatever you want to call it. Save it as the largest file possible. You don't want to lose any of that quality you've just worked for. And that's pretty much it. You've got your really good reference to work from now. Something that I like to do is also print the reference out, and you will see why in the next steps. I'm not sure if you can see this, but I'll zoom in a bit. And what I've done is I've made a grid over the top of my printout. I've made this grid 2 centimeters each square. I marked this up along each edge, and then I joined the marks together using a pencil. Any pencil, it doesn't really matter for this part. So the next part is to transfer this grid onto your paper. Now you can always take your ruler and you can mark out 2 centimeters along the top each way and make your grid again that way. Or a little tip that I like to use just to save some time is if you line up the top to the top of the page with your previous grid and you just make little pencil markings using a hard pencil. I'm using a 2H because we don't want this grid to be too strong. And then you do the same on the sides. Just make your markings. And then the same with this one. Just take your ruler across your markings and you just join the dots. Another little tip, which might save a bit of time in the process, but to make sure everything falls in place, I like to make a little guide sort of stencil for myself. And using an old technique, what I like to do is I take the back of the page, an 8B as such, and I will just create some carbon on the back of the page, or put some graphite down on the back of the page. And then what I like to do is I take my paper and I line it up, and then I tape down each edge, top, bottom, just make sure that it stays in place. And then what I like to do is I take a hard pencil or a pen, ballpoint pen, biro, and just push down on all the sort of features that I want to make sure I can just keep everything in proportion. And then once you've done all that, this is one I made earlier, and what you'll have is a good rough guide exact to the photo of where all the features should sit. And as you can see, the grid is very faint. I've done that as faint as possible, and I've also erased the rest of the grid outside of the picture because I feel that I don't need that now. So one thing that is key and quite important is your setup. Everything you have in front of you is important. You want everything close, you want good lighting. So I have a light clipped in up here that shines down. I have a light on my left hand side because I'm right-handed, and this gives me enough light to see the image as best I can. Another extremely important thing is having your reference photos as close as possible. So I've got this one over here with the grid that shows me the placement and stuff, and then I've got my high definition one on my screen next to me. You'll always be looking at these, so it's always good to have them as close as possible so you don't have to move your eyes as much. I've got all my tools down here, so everything's real close to me, close to hand, everything's set up neatly so it's easy to find. I also use this drawing board as I find it a lot better than doing it on my desk, as I was suffering with quite a bad back and bad shoulders, hunched down looking all the time. So one of these desks just set me back about £25 on Amazon. Absolutely brilliant, highly recommend. So basically, I've shown you how my setup is, and now the next thing is to get started on the pencil work. Before I begin, another little tip is what I use, another piece of A4 paper, just something to put my hand on so that I don't smudge everything that's underneath. And I'm going to be working from the left hand side of the paper to the right hand side. This is because I'm right-handed. If I was left-handed, I'd probably start from the right-hand side and work my way left. And this is just so that I don't smudge the picture as I'm drawing it. So another key thing is to always have a good brew or coffee, whatever you're into, just to keep you going. So let's get started. I'm going to start off with the regular HB. What I'm going to do is map out some lines of a section that I'm going to start, and I'm going to start in this section here. It has one of the darkest values of the portrait here, so I think this is going to be my starting point, and I'm basically just going to map out a few lines of where shading starts and stops. I'm going to be looking between my grid drawing and a lot on my high def drawing, which I've got on the screen, which is just up over here. So as you can see, I've already got my guide from my stencil. So I'm going to be using that to map out where the next lines go to. Now I'm just going to put these lines in faintly because In realistic pictures, you obviously don't have loads of outlines. So now I've got a few lines in the area that I want to start shading in. I'm going to take my 2B pencil. I'm not going to go too dark first of all, but I'm just going to start shading in the darkest areas. Now I've outlined this quite dark because I'm going to go up to it with the dark shade. Obviously I wouldn't want to darken this if it's going to be blended more. So this is going to contrast quite a lot. This is quite a light shade compared to this side, so I sort of gave it that strong outline just to give it that bit of contrast. And then it sort of fades up, so I'm going to get the basic shade in. Now I work it at all different angles just so it doesn't look sort of liney. Even use little circles sometimes. Just give it that sort of, it blends it a bit better. As I work my way down, I need to work it into a darker shade, so I'll just put a little bit more pressure. Always looking at my reference if you see me stopping. So I'll just start applying more pressure as I work my way down into this darker bit. Now this is just a 2B pencil, so it's not the darkest, it's quite a light pencil still. So I'm just going to sort of leave that like that, but it will end up going darker. Now I'm going to match it on this side. I'm not saying this is how you should work, I'm just saying this is how I work. I'm finding it works for me. I may end up learning new different techniques, and if I do, I may end up doing another tutorial, but for now I think they're looking pretty good in the end product, so I'm just going to roll with it, and this is the process I do, and yeah, I'll just take you through it. And you can always make things darker. It's a lot easier to make things darker than it is to erase and go back and make it lighter again, so I'll sort of work this bit for a little while and give myself some headroom and see what I want to do from there. So this bit's a bit darker in here. I'm just basically copying what I see. So this bit here is quite light. So what I might do is just switch back to my HB and just ease up on the pressure as much as I can. Just get it in there nice and lightly. These are pretty self-explanatory. They're a blending tool and they're made of rice paper. So I've not tried them before. I'm told you just rub it on the surface of the pencil and makes it blend. And that's that basically. Pretty self-explanatory. So this section is just a bit darker. So what I'm going to do is map that bit out first. Just so I know that section has to stay slightly darker. And then there's sort of a slightly lighter shade on this side. So I'm going to just line out where that shade needs to be. And then you can take the pencil and use it on its side to shade any greater areas. Just gives the pencil a little bit more room on the surface, so you can shade a bit of a bigger area than normal, than if you were using the tip, say. I want to blend up from my dark tone back up into this, make it a little bit darker. Now when I'm drawing a portrait, I don't look at the whole picture, I just concentrate on the one bit that I'm drawing and I ignore the whole the rest of the image completely. I just concentrate solely on that one little section that I'm doing, and I treat it almost as if it's its own portrait. So I spend might be a lot of time, but if you can get each section looking as good as possible, then overall your portrait's going to look much better, and you're going to have a much better quality finish. So almost put everything else out of your head and just treat it like lots of little miniature portraits, using as much detail as you can in each one, trying to capture all that detail. I've got a few rough looking marks and stuff in here. So again, just take my blender tool. Now I've made this bit. This tone should be slightly lighter than this tone. In fact, it's the other way round. So this is where it comes in good not to go too dark straight away. So I can lower this tone a bit darker now. I'm going to go in with my real dark tone now, just so I can see it, and set that dark tone off. I'm not pushing really hard, I'm just using my 6B. So now I'm just switching back to the 2B, and this section just sort of blends in. It's not too harsh, so just going to slowly push my way down to get that gradient, whilst leaving slight little highlight between there and there, just to signify the difference between the two tones, as they're very similar next to each other. So we'll just do that just so you can distinguish this section from this section. So now I know my darkest value here. When it comes to the next sections that hold the same sort of value, I know where to start. So I know that this tone, I can start here is pretty much the same. So I can go that dark straight away and then work my way from there. So yeah, once you've got your first tone sort of down, you've done a bit of an area, you sort of get more of an understanding of what tones to sort of use as you go. Don't always look at this as your final tones, because you will be going back and maybe going over some again anyway. The more section you have, the more you have an idea of what tones to use and carry on from. So that's that basically. Now right here I have a very faint tone going into almost a white. So I'm going to be taking my 2H, which is my hardest pencil. I'm just going to flick it up. Maybe you could tell that I'm a tattoo artist as well, but flicking it up and just bringing the pencil off of the paper as I flick, just so it sort of blends up in. It's the same technique I use for tattooing, and the more times you keep doing it, the darker it gets. Now a little tip is, I do like adding a little bit of maybe extra contrast if it's not in the actual portrait, just between real light colors and dark colors, or especially if they're very similar. And I do this just so that they don't mud in together, or they can stand next to each other and not blend in as such. Now what you might notice is this tone is supposed to be a lot darker than this tone. So now what I'm going to do is just darken this down a little bit to even it out. Now I might not darken the whole area, but I'm going to darken the area that goes up to this tone and just blend it in, just to show the contrast. I don't want to make it all too dark, because then I'll probably end up going darker over here and over here. Just going to add that bit of contrast so you can see the difference in shades. basically that is pretty much it. Just looking at your reference drawing, looking back, and just copying what you see. So I can see this bit is very dark in here. So I'll go from my hard pencil now. It's quite a dark one. I'll go straight to a 6B now. I've already tested the waters. I know how dark things need to be. I can confidently go this dark knowing that it's not darker than that. So I know I'm okay. So that is pretty much it for the basics of starting your portrait. I'm going to waz it on a bit now and do a bit more time-lapse stuff, just because this is going to be a long process. And what I plan to do is just stop and go back to real-time recording every time I can give you a tutorial or a trick and tip on what I'm doing at the moment in time. But basically what I'm going to be doing now is what I've just explained in that whole process there. Just doing it around the whole picture, slowly taking my time, working section by section, and yeah, that's enough talking from me. Let's just crack on with it. Let's see where we go. Another little tip is, if your shade is quite light and you can see the guideline through it, it's best to just rub that out, just because we don't want to see them through the portrait. With the darker tone, obviously you don't need to do that because the tone sort of hid it. So again, to build up my layers, I use the side of the pencil up and down one way, and then I use the side of the pencil again in a different direction, creating like a cross hatch. Now this tone needs to be roughly the same as that one, so it needs a little bit darker. So I'll go in maybe at a different angle again, applying the same pressure each time, just adding a new layer. Then maybe I do a few circles. And then if I really want it to look nice and smooth, I can get my blender. So another little tip I found handy, and if you have, say, a white section of your portrait but you just want to do a slight soft blend of a shadow without having to lay down actual pencil graphite, you can achieve a nice soft blend just using the graphite that's left on the blender. And then I'm going to take my clean one. I'm just going to blend it in a little bit more. I'm just going to add this sort of shadow that comes down here. In this little section here, I have a few folds in the clothes, which what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically sort of roughly map where the shadow gradients are going to be changing on the portrait. I'm using a hard pencil, a H, just so that I don't create too darker lines. I got this bit terribly wrong. Let's go back. If you're struggling on a section and you're struggling to read it from the portrait, sometimes it could be a good idea just to work on a next section somewhere next to it so you can get more of a bearing of where you are in the portrait. So this side I know from the edge of this, work this way, I can tell where these lines are a lot easier than where this one falls. So what I'm hoping, and what will probably happen, is once I put this line in, so now it's becoming more clear where these lines need to go. So I know that this travels up a little bit and then the next folds start. That was a lot easier to map that line out after putting this one in. It was a lot easier to understand what went where. So now I continue my process of blocking in the areas with the side of the pencil, as I was doing with the others. And just go straight over those shadows. Just add them a little bit darker as I go over them, and then carry on. So right now we're going to start making a start on the face. Now I'm going to erase all of my grid lines in this face just because I don't need them. Right, so now we have all the guides raised. I'm going to start pulling out a few more features on the face. So I'm going to do this with my 2H, which is the lightest pencil I can use. And I'm just going to map out and define some of these features. Now the eyes, without a doubt, are the most important part of any portrait. The eyes are what you're first drawn to, so make sure you spend a lot of time perfecting the eyes and get them as perfect as you can and exact to the reference, because honestly, if the eyes aren't right, then it's really not going to look like the person. You might get away with the ear looking a little bit different, or maybe the hair a tiny bit different, but if the eyes are a little bit different, you just can't get away with it. So I can't stress enough that the eyes being the most important part of the image. Just spend a lot of time just making sure you get the exact shape right, and the eyelids and the eyelashes, everything in one. Just try and get it exact as you can to the reference. And yeah, this would be the most important part of the portrait. Now I'm going to make a start on the skin tone of the face. So I'm going in with my lightest tone first. Now, if we make a start on this section here, so as you can see, it's quite light above the eye, and then it gets darker. So all I'm going to do is just add a little bit more pressure, and I'm going to change the angle as I make a couple of more layers to make it a bit darker. And this is all with the H pencil. I just don't want to go too dark to start with. It's just going to be my base layer. Ooh. Didn't want that. Another tip, don't drop your pencil. So in here we have quite a dark bit. So I'm going to go on and fill this bit in quite dark. Still all with the H pencil. Trying not to go too dark to start with. Now I'm going to take the clean end of my blender. I'm going to hold that on the side as well, just for more coverage. I'm just going to blend all that in for my base layer. Being a portrait of a child, there will not be as much detail in the skin. Their skin's a lot softer. So we're looking to achieve that soft finish for any sort of child portrait. And maybe one day soon I'll do a portrait of someone who's a bit older, somewhere where I can put a bit more detail into the skin and show you how to detail a little bit more. And basically you can just build on that with darker tones. I'm going to stick to the H for now. And just, for instance, say we want this side quite a bit darker. And also sometimes I like to use the curvature of the face too, or the curvature of the surface. And sometimes it can just help accentuate the curves of the subject or the person. And I'm going to be building more layers over this. I'm not going to be going as dark as I want to go here straight away. I'm just going to work my way around the piece. I just want to make sure that I don't go too dark, because I can always go darker later. These two blending stumps have now got quite dirty, so I'm just going to clean these off, and I'm going to do that by just taking a piece of sandpaper and just giving them a bit of a sand off. And then I'm going to be left with this fluffy tip at the end. And what I'm going to do is just take my blade and just basically cut that end off. If you see any bits that you've missed, just give them a bit more of a sand. Now the reason you want to do this is because if you have a dark tip and it has lots of charcoal on the tip, when you go to blend, you'll come out probably darker than the shade that you've already got on the paper, just because this graphite will come off too. So with a nice clean one, you should be able to achieve the blends that you want without having to make it darker and then erasing it, but yeah, just basically a little technique to clean your stumps. So now I'm going to move on to the eyes, and like I said before, this is the main focal point, and really just take your time. You can see sort of little dots and lines if you look really closely on the image, on the reference drawing. I'm just adding those little small details. Now for the eyelashes. Now for this, I would just make sure I've got a very sharp pencil. So what I do for this sometimes is just take a piece of scrap paper and I just rub it on the side. As this is a child, the eyebrows aren't very pronounced and they're a lot fairer, so I'm going to go just with a B and make sure it's nice and sharp. And I'm not going to be drawing every individual hair, but I'm just going to be looking at the reference and just basically following the same sort of direction. So to start with, for the hair, I'm just going to give everything a base coat again. Just the same as usual. Now this hair is quite fair, so I'm just going to go in with the HB first. I'm going to layer down just a really faint layer all the way over. And while I'm doing this as well, I'm going to keep in the direction of the hair in accordance to my reference. So I'm using the side of the pencil to get a nice smooth coverage. And just filling this section in. Now I'm going to start adding the next tones. We can see the top of the hair is where it's the darkest. So I'm going to start with the same B pencil, not going too dark. And I'm just going to darken up that top bit. Trying to go with the direction of the hair for the same reasons as before. Judging the tones is obviously judged by the rest of the piece, so I know that looking at my reference, this darker section of the hair is a lot darker than all these areas of the face. It's almost darker than this area here. Slightly darker pencil, get my 4B. Going to take a 6B pencil, so quite a dark one, and just add a few dark hairs here in the background. The next step is to pull out all of the highlights in the hairs with the precision eraser, and I'm just going to wisp it sort of in the same direction as the hair, just looking for where the lighter bits are. Just go in and add a few more sort of hairlines using a 4B, sort of middle of the range, but just adding lines, no heavy shading. I'll just go back through the piece, adding a few highlights here and there. So now I'm just going to adjust the last few tones, make a few little adjustments, some little highlights here and there. And just basically go over the whole portrait and just double check everything. And then other than that, we are pretty much there.